Emergency responders of Reddit. What are some dumb things that have led to an emergency situation? Paramedic here. We responded to this 54-year-old having chest pain. Man was having a heart attack. Dude didn't want to go to the hospital because it too early in the day. That's it. We tried to convince him to go, got the ER doc to talk to him, and he wouldn't budge. He signed a refusal. Later that same night, his family found him, dead in the living room. We got to him and started CPR, meds, everything. Dude didn't make it. When we advise you to go to the hospital, go. Story 2. Got called to a priority job. The caller was kayaking in a lake and said that there was an unresponsive male in the water. So off we went. Lights and sirens. We requested paramedics and fire to attend as well for the rescue operation. There were about 6 emergency vehicles attending, including a rescue boat. We got there within minutes and met the caller, who showed us where the guy was. He was just swimming, minding his own business. The caller said he was unresponsive, but really he was just ignoring her. Had a chat with the guy, he seemed all right. Said he swims here every day and likes the quiet. No issues. Would have been nice if the caller told the operator that he was still conscious and swimming rather than unresponsive. Story 3. I had a client once who was basically Ricky from Trailer Park Boys. Loud, obnoxious, hilarious, and every second word was some maritime slang or a derivative of. He has been on daily eye drops for decades for dry eyes. Sure, okay, cool. I hear screaming down the hall and run in, and he's wedged against the wall, and the bed just screaming, "I f***ed up, boys. I don't know what the f*** is happening, but it's f***ed." Turns out, he mistakenly put Jablaya, which is an antifungal ointment, for toenails in his eye, thinking it was his eye drops. The strangest part was the bottle has this miniature sponge at the end. So you soak the sponge, then paint it on like a gel. He painted this antifungal ointment onto his eye, which immediately went red and angry, then proceeded to do the other one. So he's at the eye wash station, and I'm talking to Poison Control, and they are pretty stunned because they have zero data on what happens to a human eyeball when it's painted in antifungal. I can hear the staff at the other end kind of snickering under her breath, and she asks, "Can you compare and contrast the eyes?" Well, he put it in both eyes. The line goes silent because I can tell she is howling. Guy was totally fine, but it was a standout for sure. Story 4. An interesting bloke lit a fire in a 40-gallon steel drum so his goats could keep warm in winter. The drum was inside of a barn full of hay. No flue. One of the goats knocked it down, presumably, and set the whole place alight. 12 appliances were required to bring it under control. Story 5. Got called to a shooting. A guy says he received a text message from an anonymous number saying his brother has been shot. He checks all the hospitals with no luck. He goes to his brother's apartment but gets no response at his door, but sees his car and can hear the TV on. We get there, attempt to get an answer at the door. Eventually, we kick the door in to make sure he wasn't dying in his apartment. We boot the door, announce police, and find him asleep in his bed. The guy tells us that he got a new phone number and decided to mess with his brother by texting him he had been shot. He then fell asleep and forgot about the text and was woken up by us. So many wasted resources on his idiotic prank. Story 6. Responded to a call of 2 minors being kidnapped and their parents being beaten in front of them and then taken someplace else. One was around 3 years and the other one was 6. They were held captive in an apartment out of hundreds of residential apartments, which not easy to locate. Upon reaching there, we found out that the boy 6 was just playing with us to see if we would actually respond. Their parents were so embarrassed by all of that and vowed to not give them mobile until they are adults. Story 7. Woman ran out of gas, filled up a 2-liter Fanta bottle at the gas station, and walked back to her car. Tried to dump it in the tank, but kept spilling. Decided to illuminate the situation with her cigarette lighter. Luckily, she was not seriously injured. Guy got into an argument with his child's mother. He tried to hold on to the car when she drove away and was drugged about 2 blocks. His feet were all messed up, so he decided to clean them off with a jug of Arbor Mist. These 2 incidents happened within 3 blocks of each other. Story 8. Kid driving his new truck down a residential street, wet from a recent rain, lost control and hit a parked car, overcorrected and rolled it once back onto its wheels, up onto a lawn. He told the fire chief he had gunned it to impress his girlfriend, and the chief just looked at him and asked, "So, was she impressed?" Story 9. One of my old bosses once built a new shed in his backyard to replace his old, worn-out one. He moved everything from the old one to the new one, then decided that the best way to remove the old one was by burning it down. He ended up with no sheds and the nickname Sparky. Story 10. Paged to a fire at a campground in the early morning. Fire department is hosing down a big class, a motorhome. The occupants are my patients. Story goes as follows. They were of retirement age and had just bought the motorhome a week prior. They were on their first trip. They had awoken to the gas alarm going off and smelled gas. The husband proceeded to search for the source of the leak. Naturally, he's looking through cabinets and opening compartments. Unbelievably, he decided to use his cigarette lighter to help him see. Yup, smelled gas and lit his lighter. Obviously, the whole thing goes boom, right in his face. They managed to escape the camper, which burned to a total loss. I gave them an assessment, and they actually had only minor injuries. Mostly to pride, I think, but I still remember his beard. It was so brittle, after having been cooked a bit, it was breaking off in little bits that I had to sweep out of the ambulance later. Good times. Don't use your lighter to find a gas leak, kids. Story 11. Had two kids being kids, arguing over something inane as kids do, while walking on a bridge over a waterfall. Big brother shoves little brother loses footing, slips through the railing, goes down the waterfall. Didn't find his body for 3 days. Story 12. Double-leg amputee drove his lawnmower a mile down into the woods, had the battery die, and got stuck. It was toned as double-leg amputee on a mower, so everyone thought we had catastrophic trauma. Policy also dictated a helicopter being dispatched. We all get to the scene to find out he just can't get back to civilization. They carted him out on a UTV. "It's me, I'm the idiot," he proclaims, before getting into his adapted pickup, nearly backing into our truck and driving off into the night. Story 13. Not an emergency responder, but I worked customer service for years, and we had emergency responders come to help us with this case. So I'll tell the story for them, lol. Years ago, behind the counter at McDonald's, they used to have these glass see-through kettles for the tea. We had an enraged, drunken customer storm behind the counter, grabbing things and throwing them all over the place. He grabbed the boiling hot kettle and smashed it against his head, panicked as he realized, slipped over in the mess he'd made on the floor, and ended up sitting down on top of the largely intact glass bottom of the kettle, and it cupped nicely around his bottom, impaling several times into his, well, you get the idea. Needless to say, first aid hadn't prepared any of us for this type of thing, and we basically just stared at him with our eyes and mouths wide open until the ambulance got there. Story 14. I had a 28-year-old patient come into the ER in status epilepticus, basically a seizure longer than 5 minutes or more than one within 5 minutes. This poor girl had been status for upwards of 40 minutes. This patient had a plethora of medical issues, for which she took several medications. Her mother, who was not a doctor, decided that she was on too much medication and just decided to stop giving her several of her daily ones, seemingly at random from the way she told us. One of those happened to be her seizure medication. From the time she started seizing to the time EMS brought her in and we sedated her, it was an estimated 40 minutes of seizure activity. She ended up intubated, tube in her windpipe, and heavily sedated, and when my shift ended, she was still there waiting for an ICU bed. All of this because someone thought they knew better than a doctor. As for why the ambulance crew didn't sedate her, I can't speak to that. I wasn't there. Story 15. While in high school, an ex-student came to visit and we asked him what he does for a living. He said he's an ER neurosurgeon. We asked him for stories, of course, and he said he was brought a man who was hit with a nail gun on the forehead and still alive somehow. He told us he had to call his older colleagues who were off shift to come to assist because based on what he learned in med school, the dude should be dead. His older colleague told him jokingly that if the patient dies, it's not on the ex-student because nobody has ever seen something like this. They managed to pull the nail out, and the patient made full recovery. Apparently, the nail went perfectly between his lobes, causing little damage. The patient said he'll change his ways and stop doing dumb stuff, only to be brought in a few weeks later due to a motorcycle accident where he fell and hit the sidewalk with his head. He had no helmet. The ER surgeon said he could only watch him slowly die from the concussion and bleeding that followed. He said it was shocking and traumatizing, but he eventually made peace with it. He said that he could save people from many injuries, but in the end, he can't save them from themselves. Story 16. I'm not an emergency responder, but was the cause of a dumb situation, and also the response to the situation. I was on staff at a BSA, Boy Scouts of America, camp back in 2004. Everything is pretty much like it seems in the pictures, really. High energy from staff members, people with a willingness to share experience, games and learning scenarios, and of course, swimming. Outside of regulatory training and procedures for keeping the youth safe, there are also drills and practice for certain situations. Tornado drills, fire drills, and lost camper drills, to name a few. While swimming at this particular camp, you have to have what's called a buddy tag placed on one of two boards, in water and out of water. There is no solo swimming allowed. If yours or your buddy's tags were not together on the same board, Then a lost camper drill ensues. Now, strictly speaking, staff didn't always follow the no solo swimming rule, and I was no exception. Everyone else had gone to bed, and I decided swimming in the moonlight was the perfect end to an awesome day. As a habit, I moved my tag to the in-water side of the board, swam for about an hour, then decided to fall asleep under the stars nearby my crafting center, instead in my tent on Staff Row. When morning rolled around, all I heard first was the alarms going off from the speakers. Tons of people running, and I was on it too. A camper was missing. We all rushed down to the water and locked arms, dragging our feet in a wide area in case they were still underwater. There were people checking the woods, the parking lot, the campsites, and the latrines. We looked for hours for the camper before they called us from the water back to the beach to declare it to the police that a staff member, not a camper, was missing. A staff member? My God, how irresponsible of them. I looked back and forth between my teammates, but I didn't notice anyone missing. Sir, who exactly is missing? All eyes on me, like a student asking a teacher about yesterday's homework. Where have you been? Me? Yes, you. Looking for the lost camper? You're the lost camper. No, I'm certain I'm right here. It took 20 minutes for us to get everything sorted out. Thankfully, everyone was understanding, and we chalked it up to a long training exercise. But I, understandably, was never invited back to be on staff. Story 17, not quite an emergency, but you'd be surprised at the number of people who leave their cars running with the keys inside and are shocked when someone jumps in their car and drives off. Edit, forgot to mention the people who leave their belongings in the front seat with the windows rolled down and then are shocked Pikachu when they come back and their stuff is gone. Story 18. Back when I was lifeguarding, I had a family bring a big circular pool raft to the beach. As soon as I saw it, I ran over and told them in no uncertain terms that it was unfit for the ocean, and especially the conditions we had that day. 3 to 4 feet waves with stiff offshore winds. The mom barely even acknowledged me, just said they know what they're doing and will take it outside my zone so I'm not allowed to whistle at them, which is not how that works. But I figured it was easier to watch them closely than deal with calling the cops. I regretted that decision. Once I had to paddle a few hundred feet out to manually tow a couple of screaming teenagers into shore on the raft. Arguably, something I could have called the Coast Guard in for, but the shit-eating grin I got to have while filling out the incident report with the mother made it well worth it. Long story short, don't take inflatables in the ocean, especially when the wind is offshore. You're sitting on a sail. Story 19. Depends on the kind of dumb you want. Mine aren't as interesting as some others, but here's a few. Toddler locked themselves in a bedroom and wouldn't open the door, and the mother was a bit wacky. One of those frequent calls, kind of places always with weird calls. We had some old guy who was living in a tent in the woods, smoked far too much pot and thought he had a stroke a few days ago. Guy wasn't really homeless or anything, more of a religious thing, I guess. Either way, the guy was stoned out of his gourd. One kid, 17, 18, so I guess not a kid, who constantly likes to drive fast, has gotten more tickets and arrested more times than I can count. Crashed his Chrysler 300 with a Hemi, got it back after 3 months. 15 minutes later, he ended up hitting an older couple's SUV while doing around 115. Old couple was miraculously okay. Chrysler was totaled, and the kid got a fistful of tickets, and I believe his license was taken not long after. Would be another stupid kid making stupid decisions. Changes things when his father's our first assistant chief, and has been a first responder for 20 years. Story 20. Not a first responder, but I saw someone do something stupid that led to the hospital. I used to sell appliances. We would have a lot of scrap units come back from customers' homes after they bought something new. Dryers sometimes would have change rattling around in the bottom. One of our guys once found a $50 in a dryer just by a stroke of luck. Upon hearing this story, one of our newer delivery guys decided to take apart a dryer to see if there was anything in it. He didn't know how to take it apart and started prying the top off with a flathead screwdriver. The screwdriver slipped and got him in the eye. He got off pretty easy with just a scratched cornea and an eye patch. After he left for the hospital, I took the access panel off of the front and found 75 cents. He tried to file a workman's comp claim, but it was rejected because he wasn't performing one of his normal job functions, and he was being an idiot. Story 21. Just a couple. Got a chest pain job. Guy's implanted defib was firing over and over. Broken, strange, non-life-threatening arrhythmia? I can't recall. But he was perfusing well and walking around. Gah! As loud as you can imagine. We heard him from the street. Gah! Jesus Christ, just kill me already. Gah! Poor bastard. Still have the XG somewhere. Amazing. Sir, do you know what might have brought this on? Me if I know. Gah! Goddamn Jets couldn't score a gah. Touchdown if I carried them to the gah. End zone. Ass gah. Holes. Got a job for A woman bitten by a horse arrived to find a mom and 5 kids in a paddock right next to the road. She was bleeding gorgeously from the hand through a blood-soaked towel, with the kids screaming and crying. She thought that since horses were vegetarians, it wouldn't bite her. She didn't know how to feed a horse an apple, and that horse ate 2 of her fingers. But they're vegetarians, she said like 5 times. I wanted to say, so are lawnmowers, but they'll take fingers too, you nitwit. So many more. Perhaps I'll feel like typing again later. Story 22. We recently had a homeless man set a large trash fire in a field, so someone would see it and we would respond and put it out, and he could talk to us. His whole reason for wanting to talk to us was because he smelled something dead. He lived in a giant scrapyard full of concrete and rebar where any animal could have crawled in and died. Story 23. I'm basically a lifeguard at an indoor pool with some additional duties, but I have stupid shit on the regular, really. We have a wave generator and a seawater pool. Actual ocean water pumped, heated, and filtered, so that combination is what really causes a lot of problems. Had a woman in the shore area where the waves break shallow part. She fell over and the waves washed over her head over and over again, couldn't get back up. One of us helped her back up. I shut off the waves, then restarted once she was in the safe area. Stupid woman goes back to the same spot she went under a minute ago, looses grip, and goes under, again. We shut off the waves, again. Help her and bring her to safety, again. Another minute later, she is underwater, again. And every time we rescued her, she was in danger, trust me. She just laughed, like she found it funny. We had to forbid her from being in the pool when we run the waves. This I saw 2 days ago. Had a group of mothers with children in the pool. First waves start, I already have my eyes on a young girl, swimming in front of me but seemingly struggling. I look around, sure enough, mom is giving 100% of her attention to her other child in the children's area, while the daughter is struggling in deeper water. Waves get stronger, she goes under, I grabbed her arm and pulled her out. Mom did not notice. Same group, I saw a woman kind of go under twice. First time, waves start, and she's in the shore area, and does the dumbest thing you can do, hold her baby tight, sitting on the floor of the pool, slightly above the water level. Every normal person unfamiliar with the waves would stand there and let the waves start. What happened to her? Of course, she lost balance after the 4th wave and stayed under for a moment. Could not get back up, though, because she f***ing refused to let her baby go. All went well, though she got back up after a moment. But the second time, her baby toddler throws his toy in the pool, deeper area, waves. Mom goes after it, grabs it, and tries to give it back to her child. Falls over and can't get back up. This time it's serious. I jump in, help her back up, but she still tries to give that goddamn toy to her child. It all worked out, but if I didn't see that there, she could have suffered serious problems just because of a stupid floating toy. I want to add to the last story. Normally when we jump in, the second lifeguard, always 2 people, has to turn off the waves, emergency stop. This time we were 4 people. Me, my shift colleague who is far more experienced, an apprentice, and the colleague who was on his way out, basically, and neither of them turned off the waves. I actually lost ground myself, trying to help that big woman on her feet, and she nearly hit her head on the wall, and they still did not bother turning off the waves. I got plenty of other stories, but these are the ones that I currently got on my mind. Story 24. I was riding 3rd seat as a trainee when we get a call for a guy having a seizure. When the address comes in, the 2 medics I'm shadowing look at each other and roll their eyes. We drive off at a leisurely pace, and they explain this guy's a frequent call and faking seizures and whatnot for drugs. We get there, and sure enough, this guy's flopping around giving a truly Oscar-worthy performance. And the lead medic is talking to their partner, but like so the patient could hear, how it's not a real seizure because he didn't shit pants, and he can administer the drug just as soon as he shits his pants, and they know it's an actual seizure. Sure enough, a moment later, dude loudly shits himself. And the medics are cracking up saying, "Dude, we made you shit your pants for nothing, you faker." I thought it was hilarious until they said I could do the assessment during transport on his shitty-ass solo because it's good experience. Story 25. When I was an EMT in NICE years ago, we had a call for a man unresponsive. We entered an upscale apartment that was a hoard. Floor-to-ceiling newspapers and magazines, just a mess. The woman who called said her brother was in his bedroom sick. We entered his room and it was pretty obvious that he had already passed away. She had placed a bowl under his mouth because he had hemorrhaged, which had coagulated the day before. It was crazy. We asked her why she hadn't called sooner and she said thought he'd get better. The joke around the house was, if you have to put a bowl under a relative who is bleeding from the mouth, call 911. Don't wait. Never thought we'd have to advise anyone to do that, but there you go. Also, it was Thanksgiving. Didn't eat any cranberry sauce that year. Story 26. had a guy call because he had the cure to COVID and needed a ride to the local education hospital so he could share it. Dude was so high on meth, he ended up having 4 or 5 binders worth of scientific-looking notes. God only knows what was actually in them. Story 27. Oh, I got this one in 1998. Paramedic called to a city bus driver with pain in right foot. Drive out to meet the bus full of passengers. Enter bus, say we need to remove shoe. Said, if it's broken or sprained, I can cut it off to not hurt you. If you truly think it's safe, I can untie and try to remove. He says he should be okay to remove. I untie my shoes, and the literal millisecond the laces loosen, 10%. He goes, ah, holy cow. The pain is leaving. His shoes were too tight. His shoes, too tight. But here's the kicker, he still wanted us to take him in. Story 30. Got a call on New Year's Eve day a few years ago. We'll never forget it. Call from the dispatch was that they needed extrication in an apartment complex. We show up and enter the second-floor apartment, and there are 3 guys in the room, clearly knackered and loving life. They've been drinking all night, and the evidence is everywhere, and they're hysterically laughing. They direct us to a 4th guy, who we didn't originally see, who is half in the apartment, half out. Let me repeat that, half in, half out. His top half was sticking out from the floor, and his bottom half was hanging through the floor into the apartment below. Backstory. The apartment below was owned by a friend, supposedly, and they had locked themselves out. There was a pre-existing small hole between the first and second floor apartments, and the first floor apartment owner asked the second floor apartment owner to try to get into their apartment by squeezing through the hole. They apparently discussed it for a while throughout the night, and the more intoxicated they got, the more plausible it became. They eventually threw caution to the wind and tried it. The guy got his legs through the hole, up to this belly, and then got stuck. He attempted to get out and made it worse. Here's where it gets comical. In attempting to get out, his pants fell down. So there he is, half in his apartment, half in the first floor apartment, stuck. Return to the main storyline. We forcibly enter the first floor apartment, and there is half a body hanging out from the ceiling, cock and balls on full display. What the... Happy New Year's! Most amusing part to us was that we made a probie hold the guy's junk while we cut him out and raised him out of the hole back into the second floor apartment. His friends were almost crying in laughter when we raised him out, and his nakedness was on full display. TLDR. Don't try to squeeze through a hole if it seems too small and you're too big, especially if liquid courage is the motivator. Story 31. Dispatched to cutting toenails, bleeding guy, had cut his toe off, as he had no feeling in his toes. Dispatched to male, stuck in chair. Yup, he was dead. A sad one, a recovering heroin addict, had cleaned up and got a job, was doing well in life and caring for her elderly neighbor, including helping him with medication. He had a dosette box with paracetamol every 4 hours, but often didn't take it, so she put the leftover tablets in a jar in the kitchen. She had bad toothache and couldn't afford a dentist, so every time she checked on him, she'd have a handful of paracetamol. Paracetamol overdose is a slow and painful way to die. Last I saw, she was on the transplant list, but unlikely to survive long enough. Story 32. Not a responder, but I went to the ER for a bloody nose. I was bleeding for about 4 hours, and then 2 hours at the hospital. They called a code blue, and a bunch of people came running in. My wife said the whole room was filled with doctors and nurses. I almost died because of a bloody nose. They cauterized my nose on both sides, and I went home fine. I threw up a ton of blood before passing out. My wife said I turned green, and the machines started going off. Story 33. My neighbor opening his gas line in his basement and then lighting a match to see inside. He blew up his house and took several hours to put out and caused damage to my house. But from that, insurance paid for a week trip at Disneyland. Story 34. I've told this story here before. I was doing work at a small-town police department when a 911 call comes in from a woman saying that she arrived home and can hear someone in her house moving around, even though all family members were out. PD notifies surrounding towns to help establish a perimeter in case the burglars try to flee. Cops go lights and sirens to the home, get inside, and start a room-by-room search. Well, ended up being a Roomba search, because the noise the woman heard was a Roomba robot vacuum that got itself trapped in a hallway closet. It kept banging into the walls, trying to find its way back to the charging base. Story 35. 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening summertime, get called for a person stranded on an island in the river yelling for help. We respond with boats and retrieve a very, very drunk mid-20 yoff who was kayaking with her friends when they stopped at an island and took her kayak and left when she went to pee. She had no cell phone and no contact info for anyone who could pick her up. We couldn't just leave her at the boat launch, so handed her over to the sheriff's deputy. 1:30 a.m. that same night, we are dispatched for 2 individuals stuck on an island needing help. Again responded with boats only to find 2 very drunk individuals with 3 kayaks standing on an island perfectly fine. Transported both and kayaks back to the boat launch. Neither had a vehicle or a ride to get to said vehicle. Again, handed over to PD. I really hate drunk kayakers. Story 36. I am not a first responder, but more so a last responder. Went to pick up a young man from the morgue, where for an extremely rare occurrence, small town, coroner knows everyone, the immediate family was sitting in folding chairs in the actual room where autopsies are performed. So I walk into the morgue, the corpse is on the metal table, the mother, father, and couple siblings are about 4 feet from him watching me. I unzip the body bag and see a giant gash going across his kid's face. Brain exposed. No autopsy had been performed, as cause of death was obvious. And I, almost gone. I was talking with the family, offering my condolences, and the dad said, "Well, my son died doing what he loved." I asked what that was, and he said, "Driving that little crotch rocket he's got." The guy was driving his crotch rocket down the sidewalk at top speed, and was so tall that his head collided with the edge of a stop sign, the octagon part, and it just sliced right through his head. It made sense when I thought about it, but it was an insane-ass story and felt so avoidable. Story 37. Not me, but a high school teacher who was a volunteer EMT. A woman was taking a block of hamburger patties out of the freezer to feed a bunch of people. They were frozen together, so she braced them against herself to pull them apart. Except she used a sharp knife to try and pry them apart. The knife slipped on the icy patties, and because she had the knife pointed inward, while she braced the stack of patties on her belly, the knife sliced deep into her thigh, right next to her groin. There are some very large blood vessels there that were severed. The woman was out in the country, so the ambulance did not make it before she bled out. I remember the lesson to this day. Never cut towards yourself. Story 38. This guy had 2 lithium batteries for his vape in his pocket, where several coins of change were also in the same pocket. Between the static building up and the perfect alignment of the batteries and change, completed a circuit and the batteries ignited on fire and burned him. Luckily, her reached into his pocket and threw the batteries out, suffering at least second-degree burns on the tips of his fingers. We thought it was bullshit until we stepped into the room and smelled burning clothes and flesh. Taken to the burn ward. Edit. I guess the PSA for today is, don't carry loose batteries in your pocket, especially with spare change. Story 39. Mom delivered a preterm infant at home. Waited an hour to call EMS because family was taking selfies. Infant ended up with bad brain bleeds and needing to be intubated. Probably could have been avoided if EMS had been called right when baby was born. Story 40. Not a responder, but I got to witness it. Long story short, a woman tried dialing out from the hotel I work at, which requires you to dial 9 in place of the 1 at the start of the number, but kept dialing it as 91. And then another one as part of the number she was calling, which triggers the phone to start calling the police. Doing that will trigger the front desk phone to tell which room is trying to call out so you can be aware, and also calls the police. She does this twice, and instead of explaining the mistake, either time just instantly hangs up when they reply, "It's the police." She has called. The police are obligated to investigate this and come check the room as a routine welfare checkup. The woman passes them on the way to the elevator and leaves her boyfriend in the room to take a shower. The boyfriend doesn't hear the police knock, so they open the door with a master key to speak louder into the room, and in the process, see at least 4 different types of illegal substances, including cocaine, on the dresser. The woman never tried to stop them and explain the situation because she was too embarrassed to do so. The boyfriend goes to jail because he was in the room when it was found, and the woman has to leave the hotel ASAP, but otherwise is let off scot-free. So basically, she accidentally almost turned them both in and got him arrested for her idiocy. Story 41. Paramedic here. Not my patient, but I was bringing a patient to the burn unit of my local hospital and met a fellow that was just getting discharged after a few weeks stay and plenty surgeries. Apparently his stove caught on fire and he decided to out the flame by spitting vodka out his mouth onto the fire. As you can expect, he suffered some severe facial burns. Story 42. Got a call once for a kid throwing rocks at neighbor's car. No big deal. I'll swing by on my way to lunch and give him a good talking, too. Turns out the caller was the kid's aunt. The kid was a 30-year-old man with PTSD. The rocks he was throwing was the size of basketballs. When I got there, he had gone into his room in his mom's house. When I told his mom I would need him to come out and talk to me, she said, "Okay, but just so you know, he likes to carry knives." 2 hours later, he came out, gave up the 2 knives he had hidden in his socks, and went along peacefully with paramedics. Story 43. Attended a MVA, motor vehicle accident, involving 2 people in their late 70s, and we found out that the driver was blind and his wife would direct him around because she never held a license. They survived with minor injuries, but for me, Bizarre or stupid decisions like that really boil my blood as a first responder. Story 44. Elaborate for me, because just about 70% of all emergency calls are from something stupid. The other 30% are people with genuine health issues. BTW, these are just estimation statistics of my department after working there 5 years. By no means are they accurate statistics everywhere. Story 45. Drug overdoses in front of your kids. I can't count how many kids I've heard crying in the background while we try to do CPR on their dead mom or dad. It's not like TV where there's someone to shield the kids. It's haunting. The worst is when they are 6 or 7, and they sort of understand what's happening and will be old enough to remember all the details. Story 46. Had a patient who was reading a book with the sun shining in their eye for 30 minutes. They called 911 when they got up and were blind in one eye. After sitting with them for a few minutes, their vision began returning, so we left. Story 47. Eid Nurse here once had a lady came in, screaming down the house with a huge rag around her finger. Thinking she may have chopped off her finger, we took her in. Upon looking under the rag was a small splinter, and with one flick, it was out. Believe it or not, that wasn't the stupid part. We then offered to give her a tetanus shot, but refused, as it was going to cause pain, and said, "That's over. Kill for a small splinter." I damn near face-palmed in front of her, but I held it back and sent her on her way. Okay, here's the best bit. 4 days later, on my shift, again, the lady came in but was super quiet and just needed to be seen urgently, as her hand is infected. I knew exactly what it was and pushed her through. 2 tetanus shots later, plus a lot of antibiotics. Later, she was sent in for an arm amputation. Story 48. Working in the Ed years ago, we had 2 patients come in one after another BIBA. One was a man screaming in agony as blood covered his crotch. The second was a young woman who had just had a seizure. They were mid-fellatio, and someone got their dick chewed. Story 49. A guy was doing some backyard mechanic work and pulled his truck right behind the older Mustang he was working on. Used a jimmy-rigged 4-jack system and went between the truck and the Mustang. 2 jacks slipped and pinned his head between the Mustang's rear bumper and door of the truck. Fire and EMS attended as well, and once the guy was freed, he refused medical attention. Alcohol was definitely a factor. Might have been the luckiest unlucky guy I have met. The 2 remaining jack just kept enough of the vehicle weight. It didn't crush his head. The truck had a 5-inch dent in the door from his head. Had it been on a pillar, he would have had a bad time. Story 50. Not an emergency responder, but I have a story. We were at the park for school sport, and there were a couple rope swings hanging from a tree. They had little noise at the very bottom to put your foot through to swing. One of these came undone, so my friend tied it back up, but it was much bigger, and one of my friends joked about it looking like a noose you hang yourself with. My friend went along with the joke and put it around his neck, but then something happened, and he lost his footing and slipped over and actually got hung. He was there for a bit before one of my other friends next to him was pushing him up to let him breathe. The teachers got him down, and he was okay, but he still had to have an ambulance called and get taken to the hospital. He's absolutely fine now, and no lasting damage, fortunately. We think this could be because my friend realized he wasn't joking around, like a couple others thought, and actually tried his best to support him. I think he put his back out doing it. Story 51. Tow truck driver here. Not your typical emergency responder, but I guess I technically am one. Last week I was responding to a doubleheader. 2 cars involved accident, and on my way there, a drunk driver hit the crash that had already happened and turned it into a triple header. Unfortunately, I have no knowledge of the people involved, and if they were okay or not, hopefully they are. Interesting night, though. Story 52. I was interning with a police dept. They got a call about a drive-by shooting in the early hours of the morning. One guy was hit in the arm while trying to run. EMS gets there, and the victim's buddy is holding him down, pouring bleach into the open wound. MT and PD yell at him to stop. The buddy just says he was trying to disinfect the wound. Story 53. Not an emergency responder, but I had phimosis. And the first time I used a fleshlight, my foreskin pulled back, but then got stuck like that. And the combination of the sensitivity and raw panic caused me to puke and shit myself and pass out on the bathroom floor. I nearly called an ambulance at one point because I thought I was having a stroke. After a few hours of this, I called a friend who's handled significantly more penises than I have, and we did some troubleshooting. Turns out foreskins can fold over on themselves, so I just had to get hard again, and it popped back out. Story 54. Have a bit of a sad one. Teenage boy, about 15 or 16, hit his head really, really hard. Parents were concerned and wanted to take him to the hospital to get it checked out, but he convinced them not to, saying he was fine and everything. Ultimately, they decided that since he was talking and acting okay, he must be okay. A few hours later, he started complaining of a really bad headache and then collapsed. His parents rushed him to the ER, where he was diagnosed with a brain bleed, and by that time, it was too late. He was taken off life support about an hour later and died. The doctors told his parents that if they had taken him to the hospital when they wanted to, he would have lived. Story 55. Don't put things without handles in your butt. Don't dry your towels on lamps. If you can, don't charge your e-bike scooter indoors, or at least don't overcharge them or overload your outlets. Don't drive on bridges like you're trying out to be a fast and furious stunt double. Pay attention to all signs whenever you're driving, so you don't try to drive the wrong direction on a highway. Try your best to avoid that zesty new recipe from Chef DiGiorno while you're absolutely faced and exhausted at 4 a.m. Story 56. Not me, but a good friend, paramedic in a major California city. In this city, there's very narrow gaps between buildings. Dude fell into the gap. Only way to get dude from the gap was punch a hole through the wall of this elderly woman's apartment. They urges the old Russian woman not to come into the room they were breaching through to retrieve the dude, because the scene might be ugly. Woman goes into the room anyways, sees the firefighters pulling the body of dude with his head backwards through the hole in the wall. She has a heart attack and is dead on the scene. Forgive me, I'm slightly drunk, but I swear to you, this is a story told by a reliable friend. If they tell you not to go into the room, don't. Story 57. A friend from countryside had his college buddies visit his hometown, as it was little on the hilly side, with streams and a forest and small canal, a natural beauty. Decided to visit the canal on evening and lit up a little bonfire as the sun set and it got a bit darker. And just for added fun, they picked the sticks from the bonfire and held them while riding back home on their bikes. Bits from those sticks fell on the path and had resulted in a major fire. The fire department controlled it quickly, but still, a lot of damage was done. The bonfire location was discovered by the fire department, and the path that my friend and his buddies had taken was concluded to be the origin of the fire. My friend and his buddies remained silent about it, till my friend narrated the incident to few close friends. Story 58. Got called out on a fire at the home of someone who thought it would be a good idea to cut down a whole tree, shove one end of it in the fireplace, then just push the rest in periodically as the end in the fireplace burned. Turned out it wasn't a good idea. Story 59. I had a guy that wanted to off himself, so he jumped off a bridge onto train tracks. But in the very early hours of the morning on a holiday weekend, he managed to get someone's attention and called for help. We had to haul him off the tracks with a broken leg, and I think he broke his hip too. He wouldn't stop complaining about the whole thing. Story 60. This is probably the most boring reason on this thread, but it is responsible for the most emergencies. Not going to the doctor and letting a minor issue become a medical emergency. Preventive care and regular doctor appointments save lives. Story 61. It's not my side of things. I just fix the things the guys break. But you know those baby swings in play parks with the square hoop bit above the seat and the two uprights, so toddler-sized children don't fall out? Very frequently, there's a call to cut someone out of those. Nearly every time, it's a skinny 14-year-old girl. Girls are supposed to be more sensible than boys. Story 62. I worked as an EMT for about half a year. The pay was horrendous where I lived. And one time there was a young male who called 911 but couldn't leave his bed to open his apartment door. The reason why was he had accidentally stuck a glass jar up his butt and couldn't get it out. The problem was, this glass jar was of poor quality and it already started cracking, causing him a lot of pain and recital bleeding. It was a long night. Story 63, out on a movement for the military, when a guy out there decided, since he didn't have cleaning solution for his contacts, that he would just clean them out in his mouth. So he brushed his teeth and then proceeded to put his contact in his mouth and swish it around. About 2 days later, he comes saying he can't see and asks to be seen by the doctor. He then launches into why he did what he did and what his brilliant solution was. Needless to say, the mouth is one of the dirtiest orifices on the human body, and he got mouth germs in his eye, which gave him a huge eye infection. They ended up being able to save his eyes, but it was barely, and he definitely got them messed up for a long while. Story 64. I responded to a suicide attempt, where it turned out the guy intentionally cut off his hand with a table saw. I put a tourniquet on the arm and kept the guy talking until rescue arrived. When we put him on the cot, he got combative, and it was pretty crazy for a few minutes. Got him in the squad. Another officer rode inside and I followed. A couple minutes later, rescue contacted dispatch and asked if someone could go back to the scene and retrieve the severed hand, which had been forgotten in the excitement. I turned around and drove back to the house, turned into the driveway, and at that moment, a pit bull went tearing past me with a human hand in his mouth. I chased him, but he disappeared. We never found the hand. Story 65. I had an elderly lady who had rolled out of bed after having a nightmare. The front of her hair got caught in the top drawer of her bedside cabinet, resulting in her descalping herself. The doctor stapled it closed in Ed, and then we sent her home. She only required paracetamol, even though we offered her morphine. Story 66. A couple was having sex, and the male ripped his foreskin open. They had to call 911 because he was bleeding so badly, and Their baby was sleeping, so the mother couldn't leave the home. I don't even have a penis, and I felt the pain of that one. Also went to a gentleman that was having sex with 2 other men he met the night before. They were all high on meth, and the patient had a massive heart attack. Police had to use fingerprints while he was unconscious in the hospital to ID him because his sexual partners didn't know who he was or where his ID was. Story 67. Co-alarm call goes off at 2 a.m. in the morning. No sickness. Elderly person is still inside the house when we arrive. Alarm had been going off for the past 24 hours. Turns out the alarm was faulty and needed to be replaced, as they regularly do. Homeowner thought he was safe from carbon monoxide because he was on oxygen and therefore invincible. Not exactly an emergency situation, but pretty dumb. That was almost an emergency situation. Story 68. I was an EMT for 7 years. We went to a call in 2010-ish where a dude was high as a mofo. He had cut his own balls off with a kitchen knife and thrown them in a bush. The only reason he didn't bleed out was he was with sober people, and they called 911. Story 69. Gas troubleman here. I once responded to a gas leak at a home after the family returned home one evening from work and smelled gas as they pulled into the garage. They went to a neighbor's house to call it in. Turns out their house was full of gas past the explosive levels due to their toddler turning on one of their gas stove knobs as they were leaving for work that morning. We had to kill the power and internet service to the house before we could go inside and vent the gas. So thankfully, no boom boom. Story 70. EMT here. One day we received a call for a full arrest, so we take off. We pull into an apartment complex with the patient standing outside waiting for us. Okay, strange, not a full arrest. We pull up, fire department and us, and start talking to the patient 20-yo male. Apparently he called because he felt like he was having a heart attack. Okay, no problem. What were you doing before this happened? Asshole said he downed 4 monsters and doesn't feel right. The next 30 minutes consisted of me lecturing him on not doing that and that he was wasting resources being an idiot. Too many stories. So many idiots. Story 71. I'm not an emergency responder, but my 5-year-old neighbor, while being babysat by my sister, fell off a bouncy house at a block party. She had a huge bruise on her neck and was promptly rushed to the ER, only for it to be face paint. Story 72. I was a volunteer at the Tel Aviv ambulance service. Knife fight. Literally. 2 young men, possibly from the same family, had an argument and decided to settle it with a knife fight. They had very deep cuts all over their body. One of them kept saying, "Something's wrong with my head," over and over all the way to the hospital. I never thought I'd spend so much time cleaning blood from a van's floor. Story 73. Not an emergency responder, but my brother, years old at the time, but dialed 911 before. And when the police came knocking on our door, my mom was justifiably horrified when they asked for him by name. My brother started having a fit because he was genuinely confused and thought he was going to be arrested or something. But the police were extremely nice and understanding about the whole situation. It seems like everybody gets one false alarm 911 call and a lesson learned for free at that age. Story 74. In 2008, there was a massive fire that threatened homes in multiple cities, and I was called out, while in the middle of assisting with evacuating senior residents, etc., on a few ridiculous, could-have-been-avoided calls. One was a guy who fell off his roof while trying to get a better view of the fire, and another was a car who decided to drive past the freeway redirect and straight into the freaking fire. My favorite, which is unrelated to your question, but I'm remembering it now, so wanted to add it. Someone called 911 because the fire was getting more attention at home than they were, LOL. Story 75. Man working in a factory-type setting decided to use one of the machines to pleasure himself, got stuck, completely degloved his testicles and most, if not all, of his peen. Sir, you need a mechanic and a surgeon, then a psychiatrist. I can't help you. Mechanics did have to come and take the machine apart just to free him. He then went to an ER in handcuffs, then straight to jail out of the OR. Turns out he was a repeated offender. Story 76. Firefighter here. Don't fry hot dogs and fall asleep. This happened on 2 separate occasions. First one wasn't too bad, just a bunch of smoke and a burnt stove. It also happened to be my good friend who passed away years later to an unrelated accident. I miss his crazy ass. Second time it was also a friend of mine. His father started frying hot dogs and fell asleep. But this time it was a major fire. Whole house goes up. Then, after we put the fire out, we're checking rooms for extension and find 20-plus weed plants and a gun. Don't fry hot dogs and go to sleep. Story 77. Called to a cardiac arrest requiring CPR. Got there and the wife said that husband was a type 2 diabetic. Not only that, but for the last few days his blood sugar had been high. I asked how high and she told me that his blood sugar had been so high it maxed out his reader. For over 24 hours it had been over 400, which was as high as it read, and no one called an ambulance. If he'd just called an ambulance, he would still be around. Story 78. 3 guys trying to take a shortcut with their car, down a small hill, off-road, in the middle of the night. At the end of the hill, there were train tracks and they got stuck. After 10 minutes of trying to get the car out by themselves, they decided to get help and a phone. Well, the next house was 30 minutes away. When the police relayed the phone call to us, German federal police, all we could tell them was that a regional express already had hit the empty car. Only some minor injuries on board of the train. Car was pulverized. Story 79. I worked as a lifeguard for 7 years. Through high school and college summers, we would hundreds of saves every summer until the park finally decided to rip out the diving board. The number of stupid adults that would egg on their friends to jump of a diving board, knowing full well they didn't even know how to swim, was astounding. Our job wasn't to save people in actual emergencies. We were there so they could show off for their friends, or we'd get the typical, "I thought the bubbles would push me back up." Nah, fam. Nah. Story 80. Not an emergency responder, but I almost destroyed my left eye with a wood chisel. It was stuck in a piece of wood and I both hand, full force, pulled it out and smashed my glasses. I told the paramedic I had a DIY incident, and it seems it amused him. Story 81. I'm not an EMT, but 2 of the guys in my office were arm wrestling, and one of the dude's upper arm broke. Nasty break, too, with nerve damage and everything. EMTs were called for that one. We put padding on the walls of his office so he didn't hurt himself with his glass bones after that one. We're kind of assholes. Story 82. Guy selling his car. Gas gauge didn't work. He wanted to make sure he wasn't selling it with too much gas. So he checked by opening the fill door and peering down the fill neck. Couldn't see so he lit a match. Phoom! He didn't make it, by the way. Did a full Michael Jackson, according to the witnesses. Story 83. Former surf lifesaver. We see some pretty stupid behavior. People jumping of rocks, ignoring our warnings of the submerged rocks they're jumping into. The seaweed-heavy days when stonefish are a risk, and people just go running in, despite warnings. The people who haven't seen blue bottles before, and manhandle or fling them at each other. Folks wandering through the dunes, oblivious to Dugit's native snake. So many stories. Story 84. Quick story from a friend of mine. A guy tried to unstuck an 8-inch dildo out of his rectum with another 8-inch dildo. Surprisingly, the second dildo also got stuck. He had to undergo an emergency laparotomy, cut open your abdomen, to squeeze them out of there. Fun fact, he said it was only the one dildo, and he didn't even confess about the second one when they told him he needed an x-ray. When the x-ray came back, his reaction to my friend's face was, "There's a second one, right?" No, Sherlock. Story 85. Former EMT. There was always dumb reasons for injuries. The first thing that came to mind for this was some teenagers that were having a pillow fight and a kid broke his finger. They didn't know what to do, so they called 911. As we were checking the kid out, his mom got home and said, "Get your ass out of the ambulance. We can't afford that. I'll take you to the hospital." I always thought it was funny and wholesome. Story 86. I work for an emergency engineer company. We had a call from an elderly lady a few months ago who wanted an engineer to come and look at her heating control panel, as it wasn't working properly. When the engineer gets there, he noticed the expensive control panel screen was cracked pretty badly, and he asked the lady if she knew what happened. She explained that she couldn't reach the controls as she is pretty small, and the controls are out of her reach, so she hit it with her walking stick. Story 87. Woman's husband was cheating on her with a younger woman. Instead of taking it out on the husband or other woman, the wife thinks it's her fault and that her vagina looks like a pair of ham shanks. So she takes kitchen shears and cuts off her labia majora. Different patient, same cheating husband scenario. Except this time, the wife takes kitchen shears, cuts off the man's penis, and throws it in the garbage disposal. PD had to fish it out for evidence. Story at 8. Got called to a school where the home economics teacher had been showing the students how to put out a grease fire. First time, she used flour. Perfectly normal. Fire was extinguished. Then, she decided to show why you don't use water inside a classroom with 20-plus kids. Thankfully, only a few minor burn injuries, lots of singed hair, but several crushed ones from kids stampeding away in the aftermath of a giant fireball. Teacher moved into mathematics after that, if I recall. Story 89. I am a former EMT. One morning as I was walking into base to start my shift, I see one of my coworkers coming off of the overnight shift. So I greeted him and asked how the shift was. He told me he had to deal with 3 people at the same time because they were in some wooded area, licking tree frogs and eating wild mushrooms to get high. Story 90. My sister's boyfriend was using a ride on mower barefoot. It was a really old mower and apparently had no safety guard or safety stop. He stepped off onto the blades. He only lost one toe and broke the others. My sister panicked and couldn't remember where she put the severed toe when they got to the hospital. Days later, there was a smell in the lounge room. She'd put it in her jacket pocket and forgotten about it, and it was rotting. Story 91. I once removed small pieces of welding slag from a gentleman's gentleman bits. Apparently, he likes to wear shorts whilst welding. When I mentioned my surprise that it hadn't happened sooner, he said, "Oh, it happens all the time." Story 92. Brand new scoutmaster wanted to take his troop out for a nice hike, so they hike around a mountain without any shade in 100 degree weather. Each scout had one 16 O's bottle of water. One of them died. Half of them had heat and dehydration-related symptoms. Be prepared. Story 93. Not a responder, but I once saw someone in the kitchen empty a full hot fryer of oil onto the floor by accident. He stood in the oil, realizing his chef's shoes were melting. He stepped backwards out of them, right into the hot oil pool. Story 94. Stopping in the middle of a 5+ lane highway all because of a flat tire. They were then hit by a car and killed on impact. That car then went off and hit another car and then launched that car into a semi. Stupidest shit I see is people stopping on the highway in an active lane. It happens a lot. Story 95. I had a situation where we had to call fire department and the emergency responder panicked because of my neighbor and sent us 3 fire trucks for mountain safety because my grandpa got stuck on the roof, except the fact he could barely walk. Story 96. Nurse. Patient got mad that his 2-year-old pulled the Ethernet cord on the router. PT lost his ELO, punched a wall, hit a stud, and broke his hand. I was assured by PT's wife that she was safe and that the child was safe. Story 97. Sending a tow service for a flat tire in a highway, the person in the car had the idea to step out of the car from the driver's position when the tow nor the road services stopped the traffic. He got hit by a truck and died. Story 98. Operating room trauma center. Let me see here. Some college kids set a homeless guy on fire for no fucking reason. People burning their weeds, making their own fireworks, and a Tabasco bottle in the rectum.